Perfect. Thank you, Maria, for having me, and thanks everyone for joining. Last time I did one of these, we had a really cool international group. Would love to to hear in the chat where you guys are all from. It's cool to see. And today we're going to talk about a fairly universal concept. So we're talking about deploying psychological safety for your platform and engineering initiative. And if you've seen anything I've talked about before, especially along the lines of the DevOps is dead conversation, you'll know sort of where this comes out of. So let's start with a little bit of an exercise here in a minute. So I'm just going to introduce myself very quickly. I'm Mallory. I'm the Director of Customer Success at Humanitec, also known as a platform therapist. I'm also an active contributor and part of the platformengineering.org community, as well as the Platform Engineering Slack. You can ping me there. You can also email me or find me on Twitter and LinkedIn. I don't use Twitter that often. It's mostly weird memes that I repost. So if you're into that, feel free to give me a follow there. So let's start with an exercise. Let's think about the worst job we've ever had. What made that job so awful? Maybe you guys can throw something in the chat and start thinking about that. Maybe in that job, you felt afraid to speak up about things that you thought would benefit your team or the product or the company. Maybe you felt that you didn't feel included in a lot of discussions. Maybe you felt that as an individual contributor, you weren't valued. I'm sure everyone's kind of been either a job scenario or some other kind of team scenario where this has been the case. So just think about that for a second and reflect on how that felt. Did you feel in that particular team environment that you were supported? Did you feel like you were valued? Yeah, someone just said, didn't feel what I said mattered to my bosses. That's a really, really, really common thing. That's a problem. So let's turn it around now and think about the other side. Conversely, what's the best job you've ever had? What made it so great? Maybe it was that when you did say something to your boss, they took it seriously and said, yeah, let's fix that. Maybe it was that there was an environment of asking questions, challenging the status quo, an environment of everybody is valued, everyone's opinion is valued, and that creative thinking is fostered rather than stifled. Those are often the best kind of team scenarios. The best work environments, the best team environments even, it's not just work, it's when you have to work with other people, are the ones that promote what is called a high degree of psychological safety. I'm not a psychologist, I'm actually a biological anthropologist, but I think this concept applies to humans all over the place doing all sorts of things. And in the tech industry, I think it's something that we're more starting to talk about. Yeah, so Rob, to hear your contributions were valued, the challenges in your ability to contribute were recognized in a good environment. That's exactly it. So that's part of this. So let's go into it a little bit more. So exactly what is the definition of psychological safety? It refers to fostering an environment where individual contributors feel they can contribute their ideas and feedback, think creatively, and challenge the status quo without worrying about feeling judgment or prejudice. It is a safe space to feel creative, to feel engaged, and to feel like you actually can contribute to the greater good of the organization or the team. This also comes up often in sports teams discussions and in sports psychology. So it does have multiple applications. So who actually benefits from psychological safety? It's not just you as the team member individual, but it's also the organization. And I'm sure there are managers and executives on this call, people with a lot of say. This is really important for you to think about, because if you can implement this, you're going to end up with a high-performing team. Individual contributors in an environment that is psychologically safe feel valued and appreciated. They're experiencing an increase in interpersonal empathy. So what that means is that you can talk to other members of your team and feel empathetic to the feedback they're giving or to the questions they're asking. There's empathy around the organization, not just between employees, but between managers, employees, leaders, and folks that are individual contributors. The other thing that really comes out of a psychologically safe environment that I think is so important in tech especially is that failure leads to learning. not criticism. Middle managers do need psychological safety. That is 100% correct, David. And that also comes out of this discussion of failure leading to learning. Too often, a lot of people will be in jobs where there's a fear of failure, and that failure means that you're doing a bad job. But in an environment of psychological safety, failure is always seen as a learning opportunity. And that is really important. With that being said, the next thing that evolves out of that is that growth comes easy. When you feel that you are valued, that people are empathetic to you, and that you can contribute and learn, you're going to grow as an individual. For the organization itself, psychological safety increases the likelihood of having a diverse team. There's actually been some really cool studies done on this that show that the more psychologically safe individuals feel, the more likely that team is to be diverse, not just in gender identity, but also in ethnic background, in language, as well as in actual work background as well. So people come from different environments and pick up a new gig. It's pretty cool. The other thing that happens is you find quicker time to market because you're driving innovation. When your team can collaborate and feel safe collaborating without worrying about judgment or people shooting them down, that time to market increases. And the reason is because you all work together for a higher common goal. And that's very important. Another thing that I think you can all agree on being very important is increased employee engagement and satisfaction. People who feel psychologically safe are so much happier in their jobs. There's nothing like feeling valued and like feeling like an actual contributing member of a team to make you feel satisfied in your team environment. And the other thing that happens is that flexibility increases. So I always think of this as relating to the failure leading to learning, not criticism. When you are comfortable with the idea of making a mistake and knowing that it's a learning opportunity, your ability to be flexible around change increases, because chances are with change comes failure. We all know in development and software engineering that failure is a thing. What do? We roll it back or we fix it. It's the same sort of principle with psychological safety. When you feel that way, you're more flexible. If you make a mistake, you know it can be fixed. So that way you don't fear change. The TLDR of it, to use a Reddit term, is that high-performing teams who feel psychologically safe are happy. Someone just brought up in the chat a really good point that for many organizations, high-performing teams are those who deliver fast at all costs. And it comes back to that conversation I've had before about you build it, you run it at all costs. This sort of old school DevOps model doesn't work. It burns people out. And that is the exact same concept. I highly recommend you watch that webinar if you haven't, because it goes over this in detail. And this is where this idea of needing to talk more about psychological safety comes from. You can deliver fast and you can deliver high quality, but it cannot be at the cost of the people that are doing the work. And that's really important. So all that being said, how do we start thinking about implementing psychological safety within our organizations? How do we start as leaders, as people who are wanting to become leaders? How do we start this process? Think of it, and this is the platform engineering tie-in, like a platform engineering team. Psychological safety is like a product within your organization. Engage empathetically with your team members. So your team members in this context are your users. And what do you do with users when you treat something like a product? You get feedback. So this needs to happen the exact same. Often this can be done with surveys on how people are feeling psychologically safe. I mentioned this a little bit later. But empathetic engagement is also just about being relatable, being a human. We all have things to get done. We all have lists of tasks. We all have daily things we have to do and things that pop up and surprise us. But acting with empathy is one of the biggest foundational steps in producing a psychologically safe environment. Another important thing, and this is for leaders, is to acknowledge your own fallibility, and make mistakes. Don't be afraid to admit when you've made a mistake. This is really hard. I can relate to this being hard to do, especially when you're trying to really, really cement yourself as a leader. But it is so important to admit that everybody makes mistakes and to be vulnerable about that. Iterate on your policies, iterate on your procedures, just like you would on any product that you're engineering, to gradually implement new ways of thinking. It is really hard on people to just go out and 100% change everything right away. What I recommend is to start small and to implement slowly. So start thinking about ways to make your organization more psychologically safe, and we'll talk about that shortly, and just slowly build on it. Like I mentioned earlier, gathering feedback from your team members, your users, is going to be incredibly important. Understand how to improve this product of psychological safety within your organization by having the discussions. In and of itself, asking for this feedback is something that promotes the concept of psychological safety. Being willing to say, hey, do you feel like we as a team allow you to do all of these things and feel comfortable doing it, is in itself an act of promoting psychological safety. The final thing, and I think the most important, is to lead by example. Ask questions. Acknowledge everything is a learning opportunity. When you start thinking about work in this context, it changes the way you think about working. I try to think about my day-to-day here at Humanitec as a learning opportunity every single day. What can I learn today to be better tomorrow? What can I ask question-wise today to be better tomorrow? And when you start thinking like that, your employees, your team members start thinking the same. It's very, very cool to watch how people just sort of start asking questions and seeing things this way once you as a leader do the same. So once we start doing this stuff, how do we gauge our progress? And that's really an important and deep question. There's a really amazing book called The 4 Stages of Psychological Safety that I really recommend you read if you have a chance to do so. And it talks about the 4 stages of psychological safety. Now, the one thing I want to preface here is that there's no correct way to go through these. It's not step 1, 2, 3, 4. And if you don't have all of these things, you will never be psychologically safe. There's no Boolean false here. It's a spectrum of psychological safety, and remembering that different organizations adopt things at different rates. And additionally, some things are harder to adopt than others, depending on the way you're structured in your team's work. But the 4 stages that I want to go over are as follows. So what we're going to do is start specifically with inclusion. So inclusion safety is where individuals feel like they belong to the team as a whole. This has a variety of different things underpinning it. It's not just inclusion in terms of diversity of employees or human beings that work with you. It's also inclusion in that they feel valued. Every single person is valued as an individual contributor, and that makes them feel included in the organization as a whole. The second stage of psychological safety is learner safety. I really like this one because I think a lot of the time people are afraid to take this step. So this is where people feel safe to ask questions, to be vulnerable about learning opportunities. This is the sort of place where I want one of my team members to come to me and say, Mallory, I'm really not sure about this particular feature or this particular thing. We find resources together, or to learn this particular thing, or to practice this particular thing. This is where I'll go, absolutely, let's find you a resource to get you more enabled on this particular topic. The other thing that can come out, oh, my internet connection is unstable. Maria, just let me know if I drop off at all.
I will. Don't worry.
Okay, cool. Sometimes that happens. Happens when you live in the middle of nowhere and you're on Starlink. So learner safety is also about making sure that people feel comfortable learning from each other, and that they aren't afraid to go to other members of their own team or other teams to learn different aspects of whatever it is they're working on or something they're curious about. The third stage is contributor safety. So this is where people feel that they're able to actually give their ideas openly and freely, even if they think that they might be half-baked. There's value in presenting ideas, even when they aren't the most full. It's really important at this stage to remember that no idea is a bad idea, and that all ideas come out of some sort of inspiration. Most people don't just drop ideas for fun or for something to do. They often do it because they've been inspired somehow to think about that particular problem, or to think about some sort of improvement or thing they think would be useful to move forward with. And this isn't just about ideas about your product or ideas about your workflows. This could also be ideas about things, the way the team interacts. Like, hey, here's an idea, let's do an offsite here. Or, hey, can we have a day as a team to just sit and do like a hack days type project? Those are the sort of things you also want to bring under the umbrella of contributor safety. And the fourth stage is challenger safety. Challenger safety is quite an interesting one. And I think the one that organizations struggle with the most. So this is where individuals can feel that they can challenge the status quo, they challenge the way things are, and they challenge the way things are currently being done or even planned without worry for any sort of judgment or retribution. This can be the hardest one because it often means challenging ego, or it often means challenging a decision that was made somewhere beyond the individual. But it's important to remember, again, that these come from places of wanting to make things better. Even if it's not the best idea in the long run, even if it's an idea that is maybe not aligned with some other thing, they should all be considered and thought of as an important part of individual contribution. I think it's worth always consulting ideas and discussing them together. Someone just made a great point in the chat that there's always a better way. The status quo should always be challenged, but it's not always the easiest thing to do within an organization. So one of the other ways you can really sort of decide whether or not you need to fit into one of these buckets is, again, by asking your team or even asking yourself. So think right now about a team you're a part of. What sort of psychological safety do you think you currently have on that team? Do you think you have inclusion safety? Do you think you have learner, contributor, or challenger? And if you don't, the next steps that are really important is to start thinking about ways to encourage your team to have these discussions. So even if it's between members of your team to start with, if you're not a leader, if you're an individual contributor, for example, if you can sort of start promoting this way of thinking, this way of, let's ask questions, let's do it with each other, let's learn from each other, let's contribute amongst each other and challenge each other, it's possible it could spread like wildfire, because what will happen is that small team will very quickly make changes, and that team will very quickly start growing in a way that is very impactful. You'll get more things done, you'll get them done quickly, and you'll be a heck of a lot more efficient. On top of that, you're also going to come up with some cool stuff. It's that power of innovation. I want to leave you some quick final thoughts, because I think this is a lot of things to take in a short period of time. And I know we've only spent about 20 minutes on this, but I want to leave a lot of time for questions and discussions. I want to leave some time for thinking about psychological safety. But think about this. Our industry is notorious for being challenging, both on a creative side and psychologically. There are tons of stories in the tech industry of people feeling like they've been chewed up and spit out, which isn't really awesome. We need to start changing that perception. And one of the ways we're going to do that is by my kind of three-prong approach here, which is giving our teams the ability to feel empowered, to be creative, and to engage in evolving processes that will drive healthier, more productive work environments. So feel, be, and engage. That is my best advice to you in terms of starting to think about psychological safety within your teams, within your organization, or within your groups, however you want to start thinking about it. We are in an interesting time as a tech industry. I think we have the ability to make some changes to make it a very healthy place to work. There are a lot of companies that do a fantastic job at this, but everybody can get better at psychological safety. In the end of the day, it's about people. Like Maria said, I will go on about this for days. There is always someone behind that computer, whether it's the engineer writing front-end or back-end code, whether it's the marketing person producing new content, whether or not it's the customer success person interacting with your customers, or the C-level executive that's trying to make business decisions. Every single one of us benefits from psychological safety, from feeling fulfilled, from feeling empowered, from feeling like we can be creative and help evolve the place we are working into something better. So with that being said, I want to thank you guys for your time and your attention and also your participation. I think that's super cool. I love seeing when you guys participate in these. And yeah, let's open the floor to some questions or even some discussion topics. Let's see what happens.
Thank you so much, Mallory. It was super quick, but up to the point. I enjoyed every second of it.
Cool. I don't think anyone wants to watch anybody bash through psychological theory for hours. That sounds no fun.
Yeah.
All right. So we've got a good question here. So how can someone with no experience in management handle and grow with the team coming from different fields? So starting something from scratch. Cool. So what I would say here is maybe do something like this webinar. Maybe do some sort of case study or look at psychological safety and how it's impacted a similar organization. Heck, you can even share this webinar with people. The other thing I would really recommend is to sort of start those step-by-step instructions, as it were, for implementing it. So start with empathy. That is the first thing that you're going to want to do to get your organization on the right path. And then you're also going to want to start asking questions of each other. Use each other as sort of a baseboard on a smaller team, and sort of start thinking on that small contributor level how you can start growing it. So remember, in engineering, most things are iterative. You're going to start small with potentially an MVP and grow it into a really, really, really strong product over time. You have to think of this as the same way because nothing changes overnight. Hope that answers some of that for you.
I like how people, start engaging with each other and start answering questions. But do you want to take the next one? What are some recommendations to share with leadership in an organization with little psychological safety?
Yeah, it's a challenge, but I think a lot of it comes down to awareness. I really didn't start thinking about this concept of psychological safety in the workplace until the pandemic really kind of kicked off and more people working from home and this whole quiet quitting phenomenon that started coming out. I started thinking, like, what is really kind of happening here? How can people feel more secure in their jobs? And then I read a paper on psychological safety, actually, and I started becoming an evangelist. So one of the things I think we need to work on is specifically awareness. And that's why I'm doing this webinar. It's so important that we talk about it because it's just like any kind of change in terms of like workplace safety or, mental health. The more we talk about it and the more it becomes common to talk about, the more likely change is to happen. So with your executives, I mean, I don't know how in touch you are with them, but sending them, a link to an article about psychological safety. There are some great ones out on the internet. You're welcome to also send them this webinar. I'm also happy to talk in organizations about this stuff. I'm very passionate about it. So, loop me in, send me an email. Happy to do that. But it's about awareness, I think, is the first place to start, because when people kind of click into the concept and go, oh, that's what that is, suddenly they're a lot more interested in potentially implementing it. It's often easier for people in tech to think of something from a framework perspective, and this is a framework. Cool.
Cool.
All right.
I see discussion stirring up, but guys, please ask questions in the Q&A section.
So I'm just taking a quick read through here. And I think Menino brought up a really good point about the old kind of culture of DevOps, where it's that old like accountability, punishing, make an example of someone who makes a mistake. That's still really predominant, but it's starting to shift. When I was at KubeCon in October and we had DevOps is dead on everything, it started some interesting conversations about this. I'm wearing a DevOps is dead shirt. I'm very, very proud of this. It started conversations, and then all of a sudden people realized, you're right, the shift is starting to happen. So I think it's coming. I think there's embers burning, and it is up to us, those of us who really deeply care about making this industry an amazing place to work, to start fanning the flames. So that following up on Menino's thing, he had a question, or they had a question, sorry. Without awareness, how to use an employee release to the team and wider departments? Again, I think it is about starting small within your team. If you have a good manager, maybe this is a great discussion point to have. Like, here's this framework for this way of thinking and doing things. How could we start really small? Even if it's just with, inclusion safety or learner safety. How can we start by picking apart this thing and building it into our day-to-day really slowly? I think one of the first things that we often do is try and over-engineer things, and it is so important to just sort of also just be humans with each other, be empathetic. What does this person do for fun? What does this person do outside of work? What movies do you like? Like, those conversations can facilitate a lot of things in interpersonal relationships. Just rolling through here. And I don't disagree with the person that said there's a bit of a bootstrapping problem where you have to have psychological safety to bring it up. Often there is a person zero who says, hey guys, what's going on? This is a problem. I don't feel supported. I don't feel empowered. And it sort of facilitates a wider discussion. So my recommendation is, truthfully, start with yourself, start pushing yourself to push the boundaries a little bit, and to start encouraging even your direct manager to start thinking about these ideas. I wouldn't just go at them and say, hey, we suck, implement all these things. But how can we as a team become more connected to each other? That's often a good start. What I usually do with my team, to give you an example, especially when we have new people join who maybe have come from a culture of not psychological safety in their previous job, we try to get together very often, or at least have conversations that are really informal. So we'll all get together and, just sit around on a Zoom call or in person if we can, and just get to know each other with this idea that you're still humans. This is great. This discussion is awesome. And someone is 100% correct. This applies to relationships in general too, not just at work, with your friends, with your family, with your partner, all these sorts of things. So job search right now, any advice on figuring out if a position is a psychologically safe or unsafe environment? Yeah, you're 100% right, Todd. People will claim things are what they aren't. It's part of hiring, is also somewhat a sales job, so you have to be able to sell it. I would ask questions about, I'm sorry if my accent just came out, specific things like, how do you have individual contributors learn? Or what is it you do if an individual contributor comes to you with a problem or something they aren't sure about? How do you handle that? Or ask for things about examples of times that individual contributors have had an idea that has gone on to become something cool. So asking for examples is always super, super good. I love when people ask me that in interviews, because I have a ton of them that are really fun, that we've been able to do. And I think those are important questions. Good stuff, guys. How do you use this psychology to get a raise? When I figured that out, I'll let you know. That's not.
That's funny.
Yeah, once I figure that out, I'll probably be a billionaire though. So maybe I won't let you know. We'll see. So how do I recommend handling how innovation might impact or replace the work others are doing? That is a really interesting question. So I think this comes up a lot with stuff like AI tools, and other sorts of robots. I think at the end of the day, we will realize that there are certain things that must be done by humans, because AI will probably eventually get there, but humans have empathy. And empathy is the most powerful tool I think humans have for each other, for other animals, for other things. And I would try to think about this like automation AI thing in the context of, okay, if this does XYZ thing better, how can I as a human do AC even more awesome? That's a challenging question. And I mean, a robot replaced the assembly line that made a lot of cars, but at the end of the day, a human being still bolts a lot of that stuff together because there's an element of quality control that human eyes can do. So it's a deeper philosophical question that I think we have time to go into, but it's a good one. Blameless postmortems are a good thing. That's a good point. Yeah, any other questions? This is really cool. I'm really glad to see people are actually really engaging with this discussion because it's got to go somewhere.
Yeah.
We can sit behind
in person event somewhere, right? Like the one we're doing in Toronto next week around DevOps is Dead. But there is one in Q&A section. What if a team member like to stay alone in his own space, doesn't like to be a part of a group?
I think that is inclusion safety. Just because you talk about psychological safety doesn't mean that everybody is expected to be like happy-go-lucky in the meeting every day. I'm feeling amazing, blah, 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 blah. For some people, psychological safety is just being left alone to do your job. And that's okay. Psychological safety allows you to do your job the way you want to do it. You know, I've talked to people before who have the primary reason they felt psychologically unsafe was because they were micromanaged. You know, that is very unpsychologically safe or psychologically unsafe. You should feel empowered through all of these things, through inclusion safety, learner safety, contributor safety, and challenger safety, to be able to do things the way you want to do them. And at the end of the day, that's kind of the point. So challenger safety would be where someone could challenge that status quo of, hey, you know what? I don't really want to be in the happy hour Zoom calls on Fridays. Those really aren't awesome for me. Is it okay if I skip? And the good boss, that is a psychologically safe person, would say, I get it, 100%. It's a good question. And yeah, actually, if anybody's in Canada or in Toronto specifically, I will be doing a kind of roundtable discussion on this DevOps is Dead, this 2.0 concept of DevOps next Tuesday in Toronto. Please come join. Be dinner, drinks, some fun to be had. You can grill me on DevOps is Dead. I kind of enjoy it now at this point. It's sort of fun. And we can chat about all this stuff too. But yeah, remember that you know, at the end of the day, it's up to us as individual contributors to this industry to push for change. It's hard to do and it's scary as hell, but it makes a difference when you do it. What does DevOps is Dead mean? Great question. Maria, can we link to the webinar for that? So Karen, it's a good question. What we like to talk about is platform engineering here at Humanitec and also platformengineering.org as a DevOps 2.0 kind of approach. So the quick thesis of it is that the term DevOps and the concept has been a victim of such misinterpretation that it's resulted in a lot of burnout and a lot of people being treated unfairly in psychologically unsafe environments. So that particular webinar, that particular conversation that we're also gonna have next week in Toronto goes over a lot of how we think it can be done better at platformengineering.org, as well as at Humanitec. It's what we preach to our clients as well. And yeah, I would really recommend just checking it out. Obviously, I don't have enough time to go through the whole thing, but it's about DevOps is not something you can buy. It's not something that you can, you know, hire a consultant to fix for you. It's a culture problem. And a lot of it comes down to burning people out and how to prevent that and how to treat people with respect, especially when they're that technical. No problem. No worries.
Yeah, I shared the link to the Toronto event as well as the webinar Mallory is referring to, and we'll also include it in our follow-up tomorrow. But we have 4 other questions that are coming up in our Q&A section. Great presentation, Mallory. How to best handle conflict opinions between team members?
Yeah, so that is one thing that happens with this, is you're going to have conflicting opinions, especially in this industry. We all have a particular way we want to do things. I have been a very particular style of backend engineer for a very long time, and I find it very hard to have my opinion swayed. But there's beauty in that. And the way I see it as a person manager is that there are two sides, and somewhere in the middle is the right way forward. Often, when two opinions differ, there is some sort of value in the middle that can move someone forward. We recently had a discussion with a client, as an example, about implementing trunk-based development. And we had to sort of pick through why they hadn't really enjoyed it before, or why they didn't particularly like it. But we have an incredible customer success engineering team that's able to really help educate and provide examples. And we were able to find a solution with trunk-based that also worked with some of the other things they were doing within their organization. And we don't have time to go into it, but the long story short was, it's about compromise, and it's about being empathetic to other people's viewpoints. So think about it when you're debating someone, even outside of work. If you're debating someone about something, understand that the way they think comes from somewhere. There's some sort of origin behind that. And hopefully they think that you as well, so that you can work together to come up with a solution. But as a manager, the conflict resolution thing is often just understanding that passion comes in all different forms, and that somewhere in the middle, we can find a solution that works. Or if, one argument is very strong and the other one maybe isn't as informed, we can find a way to make things work and make everyone happy. And tell everybody to play nice in the sandbox. That also,
That's a very good answer. Next question. When we try to build a psychological safety team, it tends to be a comfort zone. How do you think you can turn that towards a learning zone? I feel that the more convenient the development environment and development tools become, the more it becomes a comfort zone.
I don't know if comfort zone is a bad thing. But you can't let a comfort zone be a complacent zone. There's a difference. I think there's a strong difference. And a lot of it comes from the leadership of the team. So to give you an example, if I was to be a complacent leader, when people on my team started asking questions or just felt so safe that they, started maybe losing or getting behind the 8 ball a little bit, my job as a leader is to start asking questions to them, but not in a way that is accusatory. I need to ask questions like, hey, what do we think about doing X, Y, Z this week instead of ABC? It really has to come from all directions. It can't just be one-sided. And I think that's maybe what you're particularly referencing, but it's comfort is okay, complacency is not, is what I would say. And challenging complacency is about being a good leader and leading by example and asking questions and challenging the status quo. And part of it is also learning how to give feedback in a way that isn't confrontational, that is constructive.
Completely agree. Constructive feedback is very much valid. How can we make an inclusive environment when there is a 5-10 people team with different talents, nature, I guess different time zones, I guess?
I mean, by nature, being diverse is being inclusive, and being diverse in people's backgrounds and being, the way they work together. Psychological safety is allowing them all to be themselves and to contribute in a way that they feel valued in doing. Like someone asked earlier about someone who just doesn't want to feel like being a part of a big team and just wants to just put their head down and be in their job. That's okay. And as long as the team is respectful of that and everyone respects that is how that person feels comfortable contributing, that is psychological safety.
That's cool. Do you think there is a difference between how you create psychological safety in a remote-only team and the team in shared office? And what could those differences be?
That's a great question. And I could probably think for a really long time about that. I think there are some similarities. I think it's a Venn diagram. There are similarities and there are some differences. So the challenge with remote work is that human to human interaction is very different. There is something to be said about the very human condition. It's a very human thing. Anthropologists will talk about this and talk your ear off about humans sharing a meal together, or humans sitting around a table together and talking. And that really can change the dynamic. And that's part of, as a leader, I try to make sure my team does have those opportunities fairly regularly, because there is something to be said about it. Even when we've had really shy team members, they've found some value in sitting face to face in the same room, reading body language like humans are very good at doing. Even if you don't think you are, you probably are, and having that level of interaction. So in some ways, when you have that in-person ability, it is easier because you have that connection. Remotely, though, I would say the big thing is just to default to open. Default to transparency. You know, I think there's a lot to be said about just communicating with each other. I make sure my team always has a private channel we can communicate on that outside team members aren't necessarily part of. If they want to dump a meme in there or a GIF, or they want to ask what they feel is a stupid question, there is no stupid questions. But if they want to ask something, or even just say, hey, can someone give me some feedback on this? They always have that opportunity. And it's always within the team. And that has really fostered a lot. And as I said too, I try to get them together in person. Unfortunately, the anthropologist in me comes out and I drag everyone together.
Funny. Do you have a channel with memes, a dedicated one, or that's the one you use?
We use one channel for everything, honestly. Yeah. I should probably make a dumb memes channel for us, but haven't got there yet.
Cool. The last question, how do you prevent burnout? What psychological safety should be used here? How it can be used?
Yeah, so good question. And remembering that psychological safety is a spectrum, I think having some spectrum of psychological safety, any of the 4 stages realistically is going to make a big difference towards preventing burnout. So when people feel included, they're less likely to hate what they're doing every day and hate the interactions they're having every single day. When they feel that they're able to ask questions and be vulnerable about learning opportunities, they are more likely to feel really secure in that environment because they know they can grow there and they're not just going to be stopped or hindered. When they feel like they can contribute, you're less likely to be burned out because you're able to actually have a say in how things are being done in the future, or you're able to have a say in the sort of ideas you want to see come to life. And that shows passion. And when you have passion about something, it's really hard to burn out, like legitimate passion. And then obviously, you know, challenge your safety. If you can challenge the status quo, if you can say, you know what, I don't like how this is done, or I think this could be done better, here is my idea. It just means that people listen. And when people are actually listening, you are more likely to be fulfilled in your job and less likely to burn out. But it is important as a whole that what comes out of this at the end of the day is good communication between teams. If you can communicate to your boss and you feel comfortable doing so and going to them saying, look, I'm a little stressed. Can you maybe help me out? I'm feeling like I might be heading towards burnout. What can I do? They should be able to help you out, and vice versa. It's important for leaders. It's important for me to look at my team and say, is there potential for one of these people burning out? Am I seeing that they're starting to fizzle a little bit? Even if they say everything is fine, are there warning signs that I can look for in that particular person because I know them, because I've been through this process and we have a psychologically safe environment based in empathy that I can start recognizing it. And that's really important for leadership.
Thank you. I guess one last question. Any suggestions for outspoken innovators or contributors who risk being viewed as disruptive or threatening to the group's safety?
Well, I would say then it's not a very psychologically safe place if they're outspoken and they're being viewed that way. I'd say almost that's a catch-22. It's probably a damned if you do, damned if you don't. I know there are people that are really outspoken about stuff And it's about kind of taking everybody's perspective and saying, okay, what's the best way forward? Just because someone comes up with a contribution or idea doesn't mean you have to adopt it. You certainly need to consider it as part of this framework. Or you certainly need to be able to say, I appreciate that you came forward with this. This is a neat idea. Let's investigate it a little bit. And even if you don't go through with it, you've at least allowed them to come forward and not judged them for that. You know, obviously, if someone comes forward with an idea like, hey, guys, let's jump off a bridge, that's a bad idea, objectively. But you need to say, okay, you've suggested we jump off a bridge. Let's discuss this as a team. Why might this be a bad idea? And that's psychological safety and physical. Please don't jump off bridges.
Yes. Cool. I don't see any other questions. Guys, I'm going to spoil one more place where Mallory will be in April. House of Cube Party in Amsterdam. If you're attending KubeCon Europe, we'll see you there. Great place for psychological safety to dance and share techno bits together.
Can't guarantee the dancing on my part will be any good, but you're welcome to come say hi either way.
We'll see you dancing.
No,
but, thank you so much, Mallory, for today's session. I sincerely learned a lot, and I'm sure that everyone who attended enjoyed it. We'll share the webinar recording and slides tomorrow. You can share it with your boss, with your colleagues, with your friends and family. I'm sure it could be useful for everyone. But other than that, Mallory, any last words from you and this session?
Yeah, thank you all for your really active participation. I'm just really glad to see that this is starting to take off and people are starting to talk about this stuff. So as I said, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. I'm also happy to speak in organizations about psychological safety. I'm really passionate about this. It's very important to me. And yeah, again, thanks everybody. Hope to see you again. And we look forward to that.
Yes. Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.